The great hall of the conclave stretched upward like the inside of a shell. Its walls were made of crystal that had grown over thousands of years. Light from 3 distant suns came through the high windows and broke into colors that had no names in human language. This was the meeting place of the 9 oldest civilizations in the known galaxy. Here, the masters of space and time gathered to decide the fate of younger species. Ambassador Wei walked slowly across the floor. Her 2 aides followed close behind. They wore simple gray uniforms without medals or decorations. Their shoes made soft sounds on the ancient stone. Around them, arranged in a great crescent, sat the representatives of races that had built empires before Earth's first fish crawled onto land. The delegate watched with 4 pale eyes. His skin changed colors as he breathed, shifting from blue to silver and back again. He had lived for 600 years and had seen a dozen young species come before this council. Most of them begged. Some of them threatened. All of them failed to understand their place in the order of things. The Eth representative sat perfectly still in a pool of dark water. His kind had no faces that other species could read, but the bioluminescent patterns on his long body flickered with what any experienced diplomat would recognize as contempt. The Eth remembered when their ancestors first left their ocean world. That was 40,000 years ago. These humans had only left their planet 3 centuries past. A small floating orb followed Wei as she walked. This was a translator device, standard issue for any species that wished to address the conclave. It would turn her words into the galactic standard language that all the elder races used. Without it, she would have no voice here. Without it, her words would be nothing but noise. Wei reached the speaking platform. It was a simple circle of white stone, worn smooth by countless feet over countless ages. She looked up at the 9 delegations arranged above her. She was a small woman with gray hair and steady hands. She had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. "Honored representatives of the conclave," she began. The translator orb hummed and turned her words into the proper sounds. "Humanity comes before you today to request." "Stop." The voice came from the highest seat in the crescent. The Ani High speaker rose to his full height. He was tall and thin, with skin like polished wood and eyes that burned with inner light. In his hands, he held a staff of black metal that had been carried by his predecessors for 12,000 years. "Children should listen before they speak," he said. His voice filled the hall without effort. "Your presence here is tolerated, human. It is not welcomed. You have been part of the galactic community for 300 of your years. We have been here for 300 centuries. Do you understand the difference?" A sound rippled through the chamber. It might have been laughter, though it came from throats and bodies very different from human ones. The colors shifted to a mocking yellow. The Eth's lights pulsed in patterns that suggested amusement. Even the silent, who had not spoken in the conclave for 1,000 years, seemed to lean forward with interest. Wei stood very still. Her face showed nothing. Behind her, Doctor, her chief linguistic aide, stepped forward and whispered something in her ear. She listened. She nodded once. Then she reached out and turned off the translator orb. The high speaker's burning eyes narrowed. "What is this foolishness? Without the translator, your sounds are meaningless to us." Wei opened her mouth and spoke. The words that came out were not English. They were not the galactic standard. They were not any language that had been spoken in 50,000 years, but every being in that chamber understood them perfectly. The high speaker's staff fell from his hands. It struck the crystal floor with a sound like a bell being cracked. He staggered backward as if Wei had struck him across the face. The delegate's colors drained away until he was as white as snow. His 4 eyes went wide and did not blink. The Eth rose up from his pool, his luminescent patterns going wild, flashing in sequences that had not been seen since his species' most ancient texts were written. Even the silent for a millennium made a sound, a low, keening note of shock. Wei continued to speak. Her pronunciation was perfect. Her grammar was flawless. She spoke of respect and understanding, of the bonds between all thinking beings, of the duties that come with age and wisdom. She spoke in the language that the 9 civilizations had shared before they became 9, before they spread across the stars, before they forgot that they had ever been anything but separate. She spoke the mother tongue, the first language, the words that had given birth to all the words that came after. It had been dead for 50,000 years. No living being spoke it. No complete texts remained. Scholars had spent their entire lives trying to decipher fragments of inscriptions, and most of them died having translated no more than a handful of words. And now a human, a member of a species that had learned to make fire only 200,000 years ago, was speaking it as easily as if she had grown up with it on her lips. The high speaker found his voice at last, but when he spoke, it was not in the galactic standard. Without meaning to, without even realizing what he was doing, he answered way in The words came from somewhere deep in his memory, from a place he had not known existed. How, he asked, his voice shook, how can you know this? Wei smiled. It was a small smile, not triumphant but sad, like someone who has finally found something they had been looking for all their life. Because we listened, she said. While you were laughing at us, we listened, and we remembered what you forgot. The chamber fell into a silence deeper than space itself. The 9 oldest civilizations in the galaxy stared at the 3 humans standing on the ancient platform, and for the first time in thousands of years, they felt something they had thought themselves far beyond. They felt small. In the days that followed Wei's speech, the galaxy burned with a single question. It passed through every communication network, every diplomatic channel, every intelligence service that the elder races maintained. The question was simple. The answer seemed impossible. How did they know? The Ani sent their best scholars to study the humans. The Eth dispatched agents to Earth's colonies, searching for some hidden archive, some stolen text. They ran every calculation their great machines could manage, trying to find the flaw in human logic, the trick they must have used. They found nothing. 3 weeks after the incident the truth began to emerge. It came not from spies or stolen data, but from the humans themselves. They simply told anyone who asked. Doctor stood before a council of scholars on Prime. The chamber was smaller than the great hall of the conclave, but no less impressive. Its walls were covered in equations that described the fundamental nature of reality. They had spent 10,000 years writing them. They believed they understood the universe better than any other species. Now they sat in stunned silence, as a human explained what they had missed. It began 3 centuries ago, Doctor said. He spoke through a translator this time. There was no need for drama here. When we first made contact with galactic civilization, your people were not interested in us. We were too primitive, too young. You gave us basic trade rights and left us alone. You expected us to stay quiet and learn our place. An old scholar shifted in her seat. Her colors were muted, respectful. And instead, we did what humans have always done when faced with something we do not understand. Doctor smiled. We studied it. We studied you, all of you, every species in the conclave and 100 more besides. He activated a display. It showed a web of connections so complex that it looked almost alive. For 300 years, we collected data. Every trade negotiation was recorded. Every cultural exchange was analyzed. Every piece of art, every song, every story that your peoples shared with us was fed into our understanding. We noticed patterns, he continued. Small things at first, similar sounds in words that meant similar things, parallel structures in grammar, myths that echoed each other across species that had never shared a world. Your scholars dismissed these as coincidence or contamination. We did not. The scholar leaned forward. You are saying that you reconstructed Earth from fragments. That is impossible. Our greatest linguists have tried for. Your greatest linguists studied the inscriptions, Doctor said. They looked at the dead stones and tried to read the writing. We looked at the living languages and listened to what they remembered. He changed the display. Now it showed 9 different symbols arranged in a circle. Each one was the written form of a basic concept in one of the 9 elder languages: home, family, together. At first glance, they looked completely different. "Watch," Doctor said. The display began to animate. The symbols changed, shifting backward through time. Writing systems evolved in reverse. Alphabets became pictographs. Pictographs became simpler marks. And as they began to look more and more alike, until finally they merged into a single symbol at the center of the screen. "One source," Doctor said. "One language, one people. The 9 great civilizations of the galaxy did not develop independently. You share a common origin. The progenitors seeded all of you across the stars 50,000 years ago, and then they vanished. But they left their mark in your words, your sounds, your very thoughts. You forgot this. We found it again." The chamber erupted. Scholars shouted questions. Some demanded proof. Others demanded that this human be removed from their world at once. The old raised one hand and slowly order returned. "You claim that the 9 races are related," she said. Her voice was careful, measured. "This goes against everything we believe about ourselves. We have always been separate. Our histories, our cultures, our biology, all different." "Your bodies are different," Doctor agreed. 50,000 years is long enough for evolution to reshape flesh, but language carries deeper patterns. The structure of thought itself leaves traces that survive even when everything else changes. He brought up another image. This one showed genetic maps. "We also found biological markers. They are faint, buried deep in what your scientists have always dismissed as junk DNA. But they are there. The same sequences, slightly modified in all 9 species. You are not just linguistically related. You are family." The old sat back. Her colors had gone through every shade during the presentation. Now they settled into a deep blue that might have been wonder or grief or something in between. "Why would we forget this?" she asked. "Why would we let ourselves forget?" Doctor's expression softened. 50,000 years is a long time. Species change, languages drift, empires rise and fall and rise again. And perhaps, he paused, perhaps it was easier to believe you were special, separate, superior, to look at other species and see strangers instead of cousins. They did not answer. News of the presentation spread faster than light itself. The Eth Council of Memory, the oldest and proudest governing body in the galaxy, sent a formal request to the human delegation. They asked, not demanded, for a meeting. They used the word please. It was the first time in recorded history that they had done so. The Ani High Speaker resigned his position. He said he needed time to think about what it meant to have spoken the mother tongue without realizing it, to have found those words buried in his own mind. He was not the only one. Across the 9 civilizations, leaders and scholars and ordinary people began asking themselves what else they might have forgotten. On Earth, the response was more practical. The linguistic teams that had worked in secret for 3 centuries came forward at last. They published their methods, their data, their conclusions. They invited scholars from every species to verify their work. They offered to teach to anyone who wished to learn. Some of the elder races were angry. They called it a trick, an insult, an attack on their dignity. A few even threatened violence. But most of them, when they had time to calm down and think, felt something else entirely. They felt curious. If the humans were right, if the 9 great civilizations truly shared a common ancestor, then what else might be hidden in the forgotten corners of history? What else might they have lost? And more importantly, was there any way to find it again? The humans, it turned out, had already begun looking for the answer. Deep in the archives of the Human Linguistic Institute, Doctor stood before a star map. It showed the known galaxy, with the 9 civilizations marked in different colors. Lines connected them, showing trade routes and diplomatic ties. But there were other lines too, faint and uncertain, leading toward the galaxy's edge. We traced the linguistic drift backward, he explained to his colleagues. 40,000 years, 50,000 further. The patterns always converge. They always point the same direction. He touched the map, and it zoomed in on a small, red star at the very edge of known space. A dying sun, old and dim, with a single rocky planet orbiting close to its fading warmth. There, Doctor said, that's where they came from, that's where we need to go. The room fell silent. Everyone there understood what he was suggesting. A journey to the edge of the galaxy. A search for a species that had vanished before human history began. A chance to find the origins of galactic civilization itself. It would take years. It would cost more resources than humanity had ever spent on any single project, and there was no guarantee they would find anything at all. Ambassador Wei, who had been listening from the back of the room, spoke up. "Do it," she said. "Whatever it takes, do it." And so, 6 months after a human ambassador silenced the greatest powers in the galaxy with words from a dead language, humanity set out to find where those words had come from. They did not go alone. One by one, ships from the 9 civilizations joined the expedition. The Ani sent their fastest vessels. The Eth contributed their most ancient star charts. Even the, silent for 1,000 years, offered their help. The fleet that gathered at the edge of known space was the largest ever assembled. It carried scientists and soldiers, diplomats and dreamers. It carried the hope of 10 civilizations united for the first time in 50,000 years. And at its center, on a small human ship called the Memory, Ambassador Wei looked out at the stars and smiled. They had laughed at humanity once. They would not laugh again. The planet had no name. It orbited a dying star that gave off more red than light, casting everything in shades of rust and shadow. From space, it looked like a wound against the darkness, a small world that had endured long past its time. The combined fleet had traveled for 8 months to reach it. They had crossed regions of space where no living being had gone for. They had passed dead systems and empty worlds, places where civilizations had risen and fallen without leaving any trace except dust. And now, at last, they had arrived at the coordinates that human linguists had calculated from patterns hidden in living words. Wei stood on the bridge of the Memory, watching as the planet grew larger in the. Doctor stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. Either they were right, and everything was about to change, or they were wrong, and the greatest expedition in galactic history would end in an empty room. The first probes found the ruins within hours. They had once been cities, great structures of stone and metal that had covered the planet's surface, connected by roads that still held their shape after 50,000 years. The buildings had crumbled, the roads had cracked, but here and there, protected by geography or fortune, fragments remained. Walls with writing on them, machines whose purpose could only be guessed. And in the heart of the largest ruin, in a chamber buried deep beneath the dead rock, something that was still working. It was a vault. Its walls were made of a crystal that science could not identify, something harder than diamond and older than stars. The vault had no door, no lock, no visible way of opening it. But when Wei approached and spoke the words of greeting in the crystal walls turned transparent and light bloomed inside. "It recognizes the language," Doctor breathed. After all this time, it was waiting for someone who remembered. The vault opened. Inside, suspended in a column of soft light, was a recording device. It was simple in design but perfect in preservation. Wei reached out and touched it, and the light expanded to fill the chamber. A figure appeared. It was humanoid but not human. Its shape was familiar in the way a parent's face is familiar to a child, recognizable even when the details are different. It had features that echoed the Ani and the Eth and the. It looked like all of them and none of them. It was the face of the beginning. The progenitor smiled. "Hello," it said. Its voice came from 50,000 years ago, but it spoke in and everyone who heard it understood. If you are hearing this, then the time we hoped for has finally come. You have found each other again. Wei took a step closer. Around her, through communication links, the leaders of all 10 civilizations were watching. The Ani High Council, the Eth speakers, the elders, and the billions of ordinary people across the galaxy who had tuned in to witness this moment. "My name does not matter," the progenitor continued. "I am one of many. We were the first, the people who spread across this galaxy before any of the current stars were born. We built civilizations beyond counting. We solved problems you have not yet learned to ask, and in the end, we made a choice." The image changed. It showed the galaxy as it had been long ago. Stars that had since died still burned bright. Worlds that were now dust were green and full of life. "We could have ruled forever," the progenitor said. "We had the power. We had the knowledge. But ruling forever means standing still, and standing still means dying in a way that cannot be undone. So we chose a different path. We scattered our children across the stars. We gave them new forms, new worlds, new chances to grow in ways we could not predict, and then we stepped aside." The image showed ships leaving a dying world. Not warships or colony vessels, but something gentler, vessels carrying seeds instead of soldiers. "We knew you would forget us. Forgetting is part of growing. Children must forget their parents if they are to become themselves. But we hoped, we always hoped, that one day you would remember. Not who we were, but what we knew. That you are not alone, that you have never been alone, that the stars are filled with family if only you learn to recognize them." The progenitor's image flickered. After 50,000 years, even crystal vaults have their limits. "I do not know who found this message. I do not know what species you became, what names you gave yourselves, what wars you fought, or what peace you made. I know only that you came here, and that means you were looking for connection, looking for meaning, looking for home." The figure smiled again. It was a smile that transcended species, a simple curve of expression that meant the same thing in any language, on any world, in any age. "You have found it," the progenitor said. "Not a place, not a planet, but each other. That is what we left for you. That is your inheritance, the stars and everyone in them." The image began to fade. "Remember what you forgot," the progenitor said, its voice growing distant. "Remember that you were never alone." The light went out. The vault fell dark, and in the silence that followed, Wei heard something she had never expected to hear. The Ani were weeping. Not with shame or anger, but with relief. 12,000 years of certainty had crumbled away, and what remained was something both simpler and more profound. They were not alone. They had never been alone. All this time, across all those centuries of looking down at younger species, they had been surrounded by family they refused to recognize. 1 year later, Wei stood before the conclave again. The chamber had changed. The traditional crescent was gone, replaced by a circle of equal seats. Humanity's delegation no longer stood at the petitioner's platform. They sat among the 9, now the 10, as partners rather than suppliants. But Wei had not come to celebrate their new position. She had come to give them something. "We found more than a recording on that world," she said. She spoke in now, as did everyone in the chamber. The mother tongue had come home at last. "We found archives, libraries, knowledge that the progenitors gathered over millions of years. It will take centuries to decode it all." She paused, "But some of it we understood already. Maps of worlds they seeded that we have not yet found, technologies we have not yet dreamed of, and something else, something personal." She activated a display. It showed genetic patterns, the same patterns Doctor had presented a year ago, the hidden markers that proved the 9 species were related. But now there was more. "The progenitors did not just send out 9 groups," Wei said. "They sent out hundreds, thousands, all across the galaxy and beyond. Most of them did not survive, but some of them did. Some of them are still out there in regions we have not explored, thinking they are alone in the universe. The chamber stirred. The implications were enormous. The progenitors left us a message, Wei continued. They left us knowledge and maps and technology, but more than that, they left us a mission. We are not just inheritors, we are also seekers. The galaxy is full of lost children waiting to be found, waiting to be reminded that they are not alone. She looked around the circle. Ani and Eth and all the others. Beings who had been strangers for 50,000 years and were now learning to be family again. We did not earn our place here by being strong, she said. We earned it by listening, by remembering, by refusing to believe that the way things are is the way they have to be. That is what humanity can offer this conclave. Not technology, not power, but a different way of seeing. She sat down. The new Ani High Speaker, younger than his predecessor, humbled by what they had learned, rose to respond. A year ago, he said, we laughed at humanity. We thought you were children playing at civilization. We were wrong. He paused. Not because you are more powerful than we thought, but because power was never the point. Connection was the point. Understanding was the point. And in that you saw more clearly than species 100 times your age. He reached across the divide between their seats and extended his hand to Wei. It was an awkward gesture. His species had abandoned handshakes 10,000 years before, but somewhere in his genetic memory, he knew what it meant. Wei took his hand. "Welcome home," he said in the language they shared. Wei smiled. "We never left," she answered. "We were just waiting for you to remember." Outside the crystal walls of the stars burned on. They had burned for billions of years and would burn for billions more. But now, for the first time in 50,000 years, the people who lived among them knew the truth. They were not alone. They had never been alone. And now, at last, they had remembered what that meant. The end.